Hi everybody, this is Harvey Media, and this is Harvey Media Reviews, International Crime. I gotta tell you, I'm not looking forward to this movie. The sequel to the film I reviewed last time in my ongoing series of reviews where I chronicle the on-film appearances of the 1930s pulp hero, The Shadow. Please review my video introduction to The Shadow reviews in order to get caught up if you don't know who the character is. If you didn't see last time...
Ladies and gentlemen, we have just witnessed the world's most lamest way to fight crime in a movie ever made. It's terrible. It's just terrible. It's like getting acupuncture with rusty nails. Me up the ass. But you, the Shadow Strikes, you did it! You pissed me off! You pissed me off! Good job! Good job! Round of applause! Round of applause! You! You!
I really hated The Shadow Strikes. This is a movie I just do not care to see. I care so little about seeing this movie that I... Just a second. Thanks, $5 for it, thanks. Thanks for being so fast. Okay, cool. Oh, yeah. Right. So, let's review International Crime. Alright, with the opening credits, we notice that whereas last time Lamont Cranston's name was spelled Granson with a G, they now spell it correctly. Also, Commissioner Weston is not only in this film in character, but also in name. Although Margaret Lane shows in it, there is a character named Phoebe Lane, so probably just basically the same character. So when the film opens, we see the Shadow is actually not a crime fighter, but he's a radio personality. Okay. This actually requires some background explanation. Back in the day, the guy who played the Shadow as a radio host before Orson Welles took over the character to make it a superhero, the guy is, I don't remember his name, I'll call him Freddy. This guy, Freddy, he used to voice the Shadow, but because the Shadow was so popular, they decided to make it so that the secret identity of the Shadow was kept entirely secret, to the point when the actor's son, Freddy's son, would go to school and he would claim that his daddy was the Shadow, because his son knew. His daddy was the Shadow. And the teacher would, like, send him to the principal's office and send a note home to his father for lying. That's how big this was. And also, there was a big deal with the producers of the company to create the crime doesn't pay rule in the stories. They were doing all these macabre stories, so in order to make sure that the very right-wing sort of society they were living in at the time didn't come down on them, they made sure that every one of their stories had that moral message plainly said, crime does not pay. So I do kind of like that this movie is incorporating those elements of the Shadow's mythos, at least his pop culture mythos, into the character's on-film persona. That's kind of interesting. What I don't like as much is the fact that Lamont Cranston's name is right on the door of his studio, which means that all those crooks in The Shadow Strikes are even dumber now, because apparently all they needed to do ever in order to find out who the Shadow was just ask somebody. Just go up to any random person on the police force, in the radio station, on the news, anywhere, and just ask, hey, who's the Shadow? And they would say, why, it's Lamont Cranston. It says right there on the door. Apparently criminals aren't only just a superstitious and cowardly lot, they're also really, really shy.
Go in now, miss. The shadow's on the air.
Oh, but I'm Phoebe Lane.
Sorry you couldn't get in there if you was Calamity Jane.
But I'm working for the shadow. Well, I'm the shadow.
Well, then just fade away, will you please, lady?
Sorry,
I
not
know
even
what I'm
watching.
doing. This is my job.
As Robert silently jimmied a window, they were greeted by cries of, "Get out, get out." They did. An hour later, when police stopped to investigate the open window, the parrot was still screaming, "Get out, get out." Ladies and gentlemen, there seems to be a slight disturbance in the studio.
Oh, women. You and your ovaries and lack of penis. So, thankfully, the British butler guy's gone. Instead, we have this character named Molaire.
Hello, Mr. Cranston.
Now listen, Mo, you're a fine driver and all that, but you're not working for me.
You mean I'm fired?
No, but you will be if you insist upon calling me by name. Now remember, you're no good to me unless you don't know me.
Okay, stranger. Where to?
Metropolitan Theater.
What? Seriously. You bring back in Phoebe Lane, you put in Commissioner Weston, you change his spelling correctly, you're rid of the British butler, but no Shrevey. Just Moliere. So, the Shadow gets a tip from Phoebe Lane that someone's gonna rob the movie theater. So he and the police set up a sting, but it turns out to be a dud.
I ought to send you to jail for life for bringing me out on such a wild goose chase.
I didn't invite you. You crashed the party.
Mr. Cranston, I consider you public nuisance #1.
Good. I like to be first in everything, Mr. Weston. I gotta phone the paper.
Commissioner, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's such a thing as a dial. You know when they say don't touch that dial? That's not a command. You can turn the dial to some other station. You were the one who was listening to his program religiously just so that you could find out what crooks were in town. If you want to learn how to solve crimes just by yourself, then just go out there and solve crimes all by yourself, just as an experiment. So when the robbery turns out to be a dud, Cranston gets the idea that maybe it was all an elaborate decoy to distract from something bigger. And soon after he decides that, the story blows up.
Calling all cars from District 9. Calling all cars from District 9. Explosion reported at 9-3 Madeira Drive. Explosion reported at 9-3 Madeira Drive. That's all.
Oh, Mr. Cranston! Wait this evening!
I'll get him with my furs! It turns out someone broke into this building, knocked out W.C. Fields, and blew up the safe. The cops think it was robbery, but Cranston thinks it was murder, because there was someone, like, by the safe who got killed when the safe blew up. So at this point, Weston suddenly goes, like, power mad crazy, and has Cranston in prison for no reason, and puts him in a cell with white Bill Cosby.
You mean you've done nothing?
Absolutely nothing. They're holding me without charge.
Oh, well, now that son scrumptious. That's the greatest. I never heard such a thing in my life. They can't do that to you.
Anyway, it's only a matter of time before Phoebe and Molaire let him out, and he's able to get back to the station before his next broadcast. However, suddenly a gunman enters the room! It's Honest John! The crook that Lamont mentioned earlier on the air. Oh, and the body of the guy who died, his name is Joe Morton, by the way, in case I didn't mention that.
Well, John, what can I do for you?
So you're the guy that reminded the cops I was in town.
But I spoke of you in a very complimentary way. I said you were tops in your profession. No man can ask for more than that, can he?
Yeah, but you sounded off that I'd done that amateurish Morton job. That's my beef. Now listen, when I was cracking safes, which I ain't no more, I was so good I could lift the door off, lay it on a blanket as gentle as a mother's kiss.
Oh, I get it. So Honest John is trying to go straight, and he just wanted Lamont Cranston to vouch for his innocence by pointing a gun at his head. See? Criminals. Superstitious, cowardly, sensitive, and shy. Left.
There you are, ladies and gentlemen. You just had the pleasure of hearing Honest John in person.
You mean I was on the air?
You were, John, and thank you.
You dumb ox, why don't you look where you're going? This case is getting to be a bore. Why don't you hurry and make something happen?
This case is a bore? Lady, we are almost halfway through the movie, and we have had interesting dialogue, an explosion, a murder, a power-mad police chief, and energetic actors, okay? That's more than the Shadow Strikes achieved in its entire runtime. So Commissioner Weston, at this point, decides to not allow the news station that the Shadow works for to broadcast any news at all.
Now, Weston has shut down on all police news, all fire news, and all hospital news. From now on, it's no news for us.
That's illegal.
Nice thing. Honest John says I handle it his way or he'll shoot me. Weston says I handle it his way or I go to jail. I think you started all this, sweetheart. Have you got any suggestions?
Oh, nice one, Lamont. Taking out your anger on completely innocent parties. I'm sure you'll make a wonderfully abusive father one day.
I wonder if Miss Lane would recognize the man that gave her the tip that started all this.
Miss Lane would know him anywhere. She never forgets a face.
So, it's time for a Searching for the Bad Guys montage!
Like, and I'm so tired.
I thought you wanted to be a reporter. Now listen, you stick around until we find the man, then you can go home.
Go home the very minute the fun begins? Really, I'm not going to do all the hunting and then it's the shooting.
Oh, now be reasonable, will you, Phoebe? You're the boss niece. I can't let anything happen to you.
Why did I have to be born a relative? Why couldn't I have been born an orphan or something?
I know. Blind orphans get everything. So they find the guy they're looking for in the club, wearing a monocle, because guys from here just wear monocles. Either that or they have a mustache. Sometimes both. Also baldness. Anyway. So the Shadow decides to investigate him.
Oh, hello. Oh, I am sorry. I have made a mistake. You are not my old friend, Captain Litzman, as I thought. My mistake was a natural one. You know, I have not seen Litzman since we flew together in the war. I see you are an ace also. May I know the name? Mine is Stolsky. Baron Stolsky.
I'm called Floto. And this is my friend Starkov.
Lasso 26. And make sure it is 26, please.
Très bien, monsieur.
Hello, darling. Well, aren't you going to introduce me, precious? After all, I am your wife, you know.
Phoebe, I want to stick up for you. I really do. But if you keep acting like Joe Grant's retarded American cousin, I'm going to start taking Lamont's side on this. Okay?
Arrival in America, as I say over here, you must be a fast worker to have married so charming a girl so soon. You met her through her newspaper work?
Newspaper work?
Sorry, monsieur, cannot serve you. The bar is closed. It's after closing hour.
But my apartment is never closed.
I'm afraid we cannot join you. You know, the Baroness never keeps late hours.
Oh, but one evening won't matter, darling. We'd be delighted to go. Come on, dear.
Taxi?
Midtown Apartments.
Oh, no. You see, it is a raining night. I'm sorry, and it's so late. I must take my wife home, I'm sure.
But the Midtown Apartments are not far from here.
Yes, darling, and I'd love to have another drink.
That's it. Lamont, kicker.
You see, my wife gets these attacks, you know, when it's late and raining. I must take her home, but we will see you tomorrow for luncheon.
Thank you. So anyway, while the two evil foreigners are sitting and plotting evilly, and Lamont and Phoebe search their room. Proving my point, the foreigners have already figured out who Lamont is, and are making vague evil plans over the phone. The Shadow intercepts one of their calls and realizes that the crooks must be planning another murder. But before they can follow up, the baddies come back to their room.
Just a minute, Mr. Cranston. Your hand, Mr. Shadow. What do you suspect us of? And why?
Oh, well, now you'll have to listen to the broadcast to hear that. You see, our business is to get interviews, not to give them, isn't it?
I'm the Shadow. The law is my bitch.
And may we go now?
No. Now that we have you here, you're going to stay.
Take your time, mister. Taxi stranger?
Like a boss.
So the crooks realize that Cranston knows their plans and that they've got to move fast. So we won't see them for another couple scenes, until eventually they decide to move fast. Cranston, meanwhile, talks to a man to try and find out a motive for his murder.
I understand that Gerald Morton's firm was interested in some very big international deals. Was that right?
Yes, they still are. I made these notations for you.
Their recent underwritings include 10 million Argentine fours, 28 million Danish refunding 2.5s. And I understand they'll soon issue several new European debentures.
Well, what about them? That might be a good investment for me.
Certainly. However, these new bonds that Morton & Morton are about to offer seem to me to be highly speculative. But if the 50 million is spent to build up the army as intended, the exiled aristocrats will never succeed with their threatened revolution.
Didn't catch a word of that. Moving on. So the Shadow announces in his column, besides the radio show, he also writes a column in the newspaper. So the Shadow announces in his column that he will catch the culprits that very night. So the Shadow gets word that the crooks are on the move again, so he jumps in his car to get to the scene. Honest John shows up again and joins him.
Well, suppose you left the thing, and you want to go straight. You come to town looking for an honest job. What do you get? A bum murder rap hung on you.
Oh, isn't that so sad? I feel so sympathetic with you now. What, you don't feel sympathetic for his cause? You don't feel sympathy for him? Well, you better start feeling sympathetic for him or I'm gonna bust your head in with this hammer. Meanwhile, Commissioner Weston puts out another unwarranted warrant for Cranston's scalp, as all the plot threads come together for a conclusion so epic that the movie suddenly gets a score.
Remember your instructions, Stefan.
So it turns out the villains are after Joe Morton's brother, Roger, over that, whatever it was that was mentioned earlier. The villains start to force Roger to commit suicide, till, of course, Lamont Cranston bursts in to take down the baddies. So the Shadow wraps up another broadcast, everyone laughs at Phoebe for having a clitoris, and the film fades out. Final thoughts? Much better than the first one, I'll give it that. The film is as much a sequel to The Shadow Strikes as Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance was to the original Ghost Rider. The story had a fast pace and tied up all the plot elements at the end. The characters were interesting and likable, which is a huge improvement from the last one. However, there was a little bit too much 1930s and not enough Shadow. Awkward pacing was felt simply because of my going into it still looking for a superhero movie, and it ended up with just like another detective thriller. It really has nothing to do with the Shadow character himself, as well as just the general attitude of the times not aging well. The general distrust of foreigners, the treatment of women and of minorities simply hasn't aged well with time. And frankly, when I'm watching a Shadow movie, I really want to see the Shadow. I know that the character hadn't really developed the way that we think of him nowadays, but still, I mean, I am going into a film that is a sequel to a Shadow movie. And during the time, I probably would have been reading the Shadow stories or listening to the Shadow on the radio, and this film would have been very disappointing to me. If I had wanted to watch one of the Thin Man movies, I would have watched one of the Thin Man movies. So, thankfully, this was indeed the end of this particular franchise. The next film version of The Shadow was made as a serial by Columbia Pictures. Now, serials are where superhero movies from back in this era were normally found, so I have a feeling that we're probably going to have something at least a little bit more entertaining next time. So yeah, this has been Harvey Media, signing off.
What are you going to do?
I don't know.
You don't know?
That's right. The Shadow doesn't know. Have one?
I tried it once and it made me dizzy.
Oh, so that's what caused it. Good night.